Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this V&A Live webinar. So my name is Cara, and I'm the Senior Producer for Schools and Colleges here at the V&A. And I'm delighted today to be joined by a brilliant team of speakers to explore the world of digital art and creative tech. We have Jen Sykes, a lecturer in creative code and physical computing, and Company Director Craig Steele.
Okay, so hi, my name's Jen Sykes, and I teach creative coding and physical computing, which is code in the physical space. I teach various universities, UAL in London at the Creative Coding Institute, Glasgow School of Art, the Royal Academy in Denmark, and Umeå Institute in Sweden. But as well as teaching creative coding, I'm also an artist, and I also make lots of work for other people, other artists and designers as well. So I have this slide in here because I want to talk a little bit about my background, because I'm not actually from a computer science background. Originally, I'm from fine art, and I did sculpture at university. I then moved on to start to teach myself to code, making websites, before I did a master's in something called computational art, which was at Goldsmiths University in London. But I think the journey for many creative people exploring code can be very up and down, or it can be very up at the beginning in a diagonal line as we start to follow instructions. But then as we start to explore our own ideas, it becomes a bit more wobbly and a bit more up and down continuously. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So I really like teaching code. I like to use it as a creative material. So a little bit like other art making materials, maybe clay or paint. But this time I use code, and I use it in a way to make expressive graphics, or maybe kinetic, moving sculptures and outputs, and lots of different variations of being experimental and expressive with my material. Alongside my own work, I'm often asked to make work for other people. And this was a commission from the BBC and product designer in Glasgow, Milstrip. My role in this project involved making custom-made music players, so MP3, iPod type players that were solar powered. And they were hidden in the arms of the bench here. The designer Mill was really interested in how we explore and observe our day-to-day life and our surroundings. So he was very keen to make the bench, this custom-made bench, at lots of different heights so people could experience different surroundings depending on where they sat. So this bench toured the United Kingdom. It went to different railway stations, Glasgow, Cardiff, Belfast, London, St Pancras, and people could walk up to the bench, plug in their headphones, and listen to stories about that city. This also inspired lots of other solar powered work that I made for people. So here we have a really large scale solar panel that's powering an audio piece. And this had to go out to Edinburgh in Scotland and be outside without any other electricity for, I think, 2 months. It was in an installation for Edinburgh Art Festival. There's also a piece recently in Dublin where the artist had a custom-made solar panel made. And depending on whether it was really sunny or really grey and dark, it controlled how loud the volume of their sound piece was in a gallery. So it was just emitted this constant looping sound into this space, but depending on what the weather was like outside, depending on how loud you experienced it. I think on this day it was probably quite loud, but I think maybe in Dublin in general, it might have been quite a quiet experience. So coming back to our creative learning journey, I think when we combine methods and material, like especially if we're from creative backgrounds, we're combining maybe art or music or design with computer science or something scientific. We have lots of different languages for that, or we have a language for art and a language for computing. So when we start to join them up, we're speaking 2 different languages. And this can mean that this middle squiggly line bit, this is where we maybe have misunderstandings or we make mistakes. So a lot of my role as a teacher is to make some tools to help people with these mistakes or these squiggly line moments. So making electronic circuits to allow you to more freely express yourself and not have to worry so much about the small mistakes that are quite tricky to make, such as where does my wire go, or how does this connect to this bit. I've also made an online teaching tool which uses something called P5, which Craig and I will talk about later on, which allows you to kind of edit the code and change different lines of the code. And in this example here, this is an example of how we have two languages for these things. We have a drawing that can animate and a drawing that can represent something that looks a little bit more like what we might do with pencil and paper, where we leave the traces of the lines behind. But by changing just 2 or 3 lines of code, we can make something change in its visual. It can change from being an animation to be more like a kind of sketch. So this tool facilitates that. It kind of allows you to go online and explore making these misunderstandings, making these mistakes, and fixing them in real time and typing into the code so that you get to understand what you're doing to a greater degree. Alongside that website, that graphical tool, I also make physical shields, these are called, physical circuits. So often when I teach physical computing, which is the same using creative coding, but working with electronics, so and things like motors or lights or sensors in different kinds of ways, often it's the same. We can make these mistakes or we can have these misunderstandings, but it's actually a little bit harder to see them because they almost go into this invisible land of wires and circuits, and it can be very hard when you're beginning to learn how to do these things to understand where you might have made a mistake. So this tool that I've designed that I'm working on right now as a teacher allows you to place this black board that you see in the image on top of your circuit. And then on the right, you'll see an image of lots of different little tiny lights. So they all light up different colors and they allow you to see exactly what messages you're sending the electronics and why. But as part of my collaboration with digital skills education, we explored how we might use code to generate graphical selfies, how we might convert the idea of a portrait or a selfie into like an expressive, abstract piece of art. So this is a snapshot of like hundreds and hundreds of selfies, coded selfies that many students have made over the past few years. It's just a little snippet of what we're about to explore with you. So I think at this point, I'll also bring Craig in and hand over to him to talk a little bit about the task itself, or the workshop, the exercise itself of code your own data selfies.
Thanks.
And exactly what we did there and how we might do it.
Thanks, Jen. So hello, everyone. My name's Craig Steele. So I run the technology education company called Digital Skills Education. And we love finding new ways to teach people digital skills, but in a creative way. So I was really excited to team up with Jen for this project, which is about coding your own data selfie.
So I'll just kick off with a question, Jen, about your career in particular. I absolutely love the graph, by the way. And I think it's a really interesting way of looking at, the careers in the creative industries. And I was chatting to our V&A artist in residence recently, and she discussed about her career so far and how that has, changed. It goes in peaks and troughs, and it's not necessarily a straight line. And I think that's a really good thing to kind of point out, that it will go at different rates at different times, and depending on what's, what people like, what's in demand. And I think it's quite a good thing to sort of make people aware of. But I'm really keen. So you come from a fine art background. You studied sculpture. Can you just explain a little bit more about how you ended up in the kind of digital sphere? That would be really interesting to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So at university, when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was doing sculpture. And I think it became apparent to me that maybe some of the more what we might consider the traditional materials, maybe like woodwork or metalwork, they weren't really speaking to me very effectively. I wasn't really having creative ideas with those in mind, but I was presented with working with video, and that started to really resonate with me, both film video, so analog film, and also digital. And I became very interested in the editing process, but I became interested in it from the perspective of like deconstructing it and understanding it and taking it apart. And from there, at the time when I was studying, it was things like building websites and things. It was very new. It wasn't very established. We didn't have things like WordPress and blogs where you're given a template and you just kind of fill in your content. If you wanted to make a website, you had to do all of that from scratch. But that really interests me. So I started to teach myself, how do I build the structure of a website, and become quite interested in that process, again, kind of deconstructing it and understanding the patterns. And from there, someone told me about this physical computing tool. There's a company called Arduino. It's a little bit like P5. It's kind of what's called open source, which is developed by the community, and it's free as a result. And someone told me about this, and it was almost like a bit of a light bulb moment where it joins the 3D, the physical, the sculpture bit that I enjoy with the code bit, and it all came together. And then I just started learning more about that before doing my master's.
Now that's really interesting, because I think what I've taken from that is that it's really important to kind of experiment with different media and don't feel like early on that you have to really narrow down into one particular field, but keep yourself open to possibilities and be exposed to lots of different types of art and design. And I also think that obviously pursuing something that really interests you, so you find that, you know, understanding and deconstructing how things work was really, you know, really inspired you. So it's sort of combining then your interest in fine art with how things work. And I think that sounds really, really great. So one of the questions we had come in on the Q&A panel is about actually getting a job as a creative technologist. So would you have any sort of advice on how to go about getting a job in this particular field? And where to look, for example, or any ideas or tips? Craig, you might.
Yeah, sure. I can start and jump in, Craig, if you want. I think, even the term creative technologist it wasn't really around maybe a few years ago, but now people are more familiar with creative coding as a material for working with. And I think in some ways, creative technologists, we're in a very unique position, because quite often we maybe come from other creative backgrounds of art or music or design. And we, like I said in my presentation, we already speak that language. And then we learn code and we speak this language. So it means we can actually speak to a lot of different people. And I often find in design studios or in advertising agencies or even engineering companies, there's a big engineering company called Cara in London, and they're really seeking out people that can speak to multiple areas that already work within their company and be able to cross over in that way. And it's really sought after. And now that we do have a term for what we want, which is creative technologist, you actually will, if you search for that term, you will find lots of job opportunities there. But another really good way of trying to find these roles is to look for companies that maybe design studios that work with maybe museums, or they work with advertising, and often they have strands within it where they need something interactive. And then when you bring interactivity into it, you're often bringing creative code into it. And that's where your role as a creative technologist comes into play.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting because it's an area that's obviously developed so quickly that almost the term itself is catching up with with the industry. But like you say, in terms of transferability, there's so many possibilities within different sectors, which is what makes this so exciting. It's such a growing area. And Craig, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to build on what Jen's saying, it's this idea, a lot of people who might be working as creative technologists now already have a sort of background that mixes between the technical side and a traditional art side. So even in my own studies, like I studied computer science with theatre studies. So again, you wouldn't probably think that those are the types of subjects that would go together, but actually that's always given me an appreciation of both sides. And like you're saying, Jen, what that means is I've ended up having conversations with two different types of people, and you can find ways to join them together. You can find ways of saying, oh, actually, have you thought about that, doing more artistic stuff with your technology? Or can you find ways to bring interesting things about technology into an art setting that maybe hasn't been done before? And I think that at the moment just now, people just don't realize that it's an option sometimes, especially a lot of companies that haven't dealt with any sort of digital art before or creative uses of technology. But we're starting to see more places, like maybe not just the technology jobs itself if you were to search for them, but almost like having conversations with a company that maybe has never considered doing this type of thing before, and actually saying to them, well, say you approached a museum or you approached a small community group and you're like, I'm really interested in this area, but also I have skills in this sort of type of thing. Just the fact that Jen brings up some of those amazing things that she's worked on, probably you can imagine, I imagine when you show them to people as well, it sparks ideas in their head, Jen. They just don't realize that that's the type of thing that could be done, that could be possible, and the fact that you could be the one doing that for them. So yeah, my advice would be, if you're interested in technology, explore that further, but also exploring your creative skills at the same time and finding ways to bring what sometimes people think are quite separate things, finding ways to bring them together.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. It's so exciting to hear that you studied computer science and theatre studies.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Love that.
Yeah.
So we have a question. I think someone wanted to know the name of the engineering company again in London that you mentioned. That was ARUP. So ARUP is the engineering company. And then we also have a question. So someone wants to know, do you have any views on NFTs?
You want to go first, Jen, or shall I?
You go first.
I'll go first, and then you can say, well, my view on mine's is quite simple, because when I was younger, I always liked collecting things. So I always collected things like Pokemon cards. I liked owning things. I liked trading things. I've got tons of books and things like that. So I've always liked this idea of seeking something out that maybe some people don't have, or something that's quite hard to get. And obviously appreciating those things, not just for having it, but appreciating the art and the sort of work that's went into making that thing. So when I think of NFTs, so NFTs, in case you don't know what they are, these are sort of digital assets, digital creations, but the idea is that generally they're a limited number and they can only be owned by maybe one person or a limited number of people, and you can transfer that to other people. So I like that idea of it. I am less interested in the sort of speculative side of, should I make this art so I can sell it, or should I be collecting these things so I can try and make money from them? And sometimes I've been, online in the tech community, the people I speak with there, sometimes they see that as a way of making money rather than the appreciation of the actual thing. So that's my thoughts, Jen. What's your take?
Yeah, I think when it first, for want of a better word, came on the scene and was booming, it was quite bad for the environment and the energy that it was using. I think that now there have been improvements in different ways of exchanging NFTs, so that that's not such a factor anymore. It's not so negative in its impact. And I think it's, in some ways, has been very positive. I think it hasn't solved all of the issues of the kind of hierarchy of a gallery or an art institutional hierarchy, but it has made some steps for giving platforms for more marginalized people that otherwise wouldn't find it as easy to break down those barriers that are systematically in place within art and design already. It hasn't solved that problem, but in some areas it's made that less of a factor. And I think that's a positive.
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the kind of environmental impact as well, because it's not something we often think about when it comes to digital art and design and the digital world. So it's really interesting to hear that aspect, and good to hear also that it's improved in recent years. So that's fantastic. So we have, I wanted to ask a quick question about, so the students on the call today, they're sort of key stage 3 and 4. And if they were interested in getting into kind of a career of this nature, so within creative technologies, what would be your top advice for them at this stage? What kinds of things do you think they should be doing? What sort of subjects should they be considering? Any advice for this particular age group that we have on the call today?
Yeah, I think what Craig was saying earlier, try to keep both doors open, essentially. Try to, if you can, I know this is easier said than done when you're choosing subjects to do exams in, and sometimes you're a little bit restricted as to what you can choose to go together. But if you can, try to keep things open and still have a creative subject, as well as perhaps either a computer science, or if your school doesn't provide that, then maybe a mathematics, just or a science-based topic, so that if you then do something more specialized like creative coding at university or higher education, college, it hasn't been a long time since you looked at any maths or science. I'm speaking from someone that dropped all that very early on. We didn't have computer classes when I was at school, but I dropped all sciences and maths as soon as I could. And then when I started to revisit computer code, I suddenly realized actually that might have been quite useful to have stayed doing that a little bit longer. But not a disaster if you've already decided to drop it.
I'll talk a bit about from the informal side of learning then. So what can you do that way? Well, say you might not get the opportunities to choose certain subjects at school. So say you definitely want to do art and design, or you want to do computer science or a subject like that. But you could also look up things like, are there any coding clubs near me? Are there any tech clubs that I could go and be part of? Things like meetups, because then what you'll get to do is you'll get to meet other people who are interested in those types of things. And often you'll get to see the types of tools and the types of things that they're making as well. I know that Jen and I, we've been to quite a few of these clubs, either together or independently, and met each other there again. And, you know, you get to make that network then of, you know, other people who are interested in these types of things. And that goes back to what you were saying, Jen, earlier. The more connections you make with people who share those sort of interests, and you say what particular side of creative technology you are interested in. So that might be 3D modeling. That might be physical computing, like Jen's talking about. It could be projection mapping. You get to see how that might link in with other people's projects, so that if someone has an opportunity that comes up and says, I'm really interested in doing something with this tech, they'll think of you, or they'll remember something that you've shared and showed with them before as well. So there's that element of it as well. And also nowadays in your school library and in other libraries, there'll be books out there to get started in learning a bit more about the theory behind digital technologies and in computer coding as well. So, you know, if you're maybe not ready to jump into a big social group already, start by getting some of them out and read through them as well. That will just add on to your skills and experience too. And I have to say, like, the best resource for learning a lot of these tools, you know, if you're doing it in an informal environment, YouTube as well. Lots of great people sharing their stuff on there. And in fact, I've taught courses before, and we've always went back to using, here's a great example of something I've seen on YouTube, or this person's really good at teaching this concept as well. So yeah, using YouTube for education is something that I still do every day too.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really great advice. And like I said, I think making those networks and building connections is really important. And it sounds like, Jen, that's something that you've done throughout your career and as you've sort of established yourself in this area. So that's really great advice. Thank you. So we have a question from someone who, they say they're not an artist themselves, in inverted commas, but they are interested in the field of media arts and creative coding. Can you sort of let them know how they could develop their experience in this area and what kinds of opportunities there might be, even though they're not coming from an arts background themselves?
I'll say what I think, Jen, and then you can jump in as well. Like, if you are interested in helping artists exhibit their work or organise these types of events, you're going to become very popular if you start speaking to some artists, because that side of being able to coordinate and organise and promote their own work, a lot of artists find quite difficult to do. They find it difficult to talk about what they've made. They find it difficult to do the sort of logistics and administrative side that is really important as well. So again, my suggestion would be go along to places like, if you're a student just now, your student union's probably got societies and groups of people interested in this type of thing. If you see what they're doing, and maybe you're the one that says to them, actually, you know, a group of you have something that has a theme, that has something in common, maybe we could bring something together. Jen, what about your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree, especially that last bit, is that I think collaboration is really important when you're making anything creative. Nearly all, in fact, all of those examples that I showed you in my presentation, they were, you know, at least 3, 4, 5 people, maybe more involved in those. And often when you go to galleries, the amount of people involved in the work, it's not one artist, it's not the artist on the pedestal, it's a collaborative process. So like Craig was already saying, it's about your skill set and bringing your skill set to the team to collaborate with others. Like, there's things that I'm very bad at that I ask other people to do, and vice versa. They come to me because they can't do something else. So I think it's a little bit of an illusion that we have this singular artist up on stage. It's a team of people, and you bring whatever skills you have to that team.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, I think working in the creative industries is really all about collaboration and thinking about what different skills you need to combine to make things work, and thinking about collectives, so bringing together artists and people from different disciplines to kind of really make a project, you know, bring a project to life. So there's definitely room for that question there within this sphere, for sure. So there's a final question. Actually, it's specifically about the data selfies coding. So they want to know about how you would, did you see that on the screen, Craig? Yeah.
Remote debugging.
What does it
Yes.
say? How would you know what code to put in and what image that you want for the data selfie? Okay.
So it sounds like you're wanting to add an image into your data selfie code. Now, the way that we've designed it just now is so that basically it wouldn't be easy for you to add in an image that you've just downloaded for the internet, because the idea is that you're creating your own image. But that is something that you can do in P5.js. And I don't have the library open in front of me just now, Jen, but there's a certain command for that, isn't there?
Yeah, but also I think I'm interpreting the question slightly different. So maybe we can give two answers, whatever the interpretation is. I'm wondering if you mean, how do I know I've got an idea of a graphical output in mind? How do I know what code to put in order to get that result? Well, in some ways, the way we've structured that page is for it to be very abstract. So for it to almost generate a different thing every time. But that's not to say that you have to do that when you write your own things. But like we were doing earlier, sometimes you can spot the patterns. So like how many letters means how many sides. And actually, we skipped right down to the last exercise 5. But there's 4 more exercises before that on the worksheet that allow you to step through understanding that a little bit more and seeing, okay, if I put this word in, what did I get out? What does it change? So you can do it in building blocks and in steps, so that when you get to the last one that we showed, maybe you can see some of those patterns a little bit more easily as well.
I think that's a good point, Jen, because if you were thinking about taking a portrait or doing some sort of self-portrait in a traditional method, you probably have a vision of what you think it's going to look like how it might appear. Whereas in this tool that we're using, it's not easy to know what it's going to look like. But that's quite a common theme in generative art, isn't it? Where I've done audio pieces before where I created bits of code that I just liked the look of what the code was doing, and I didn't know how it was going to sound. And luckily it sounded good when I produced it. So I used a tool called Sonic Pi to do this. But that's not always the way that, or maybe it is the way that some artists produce their other work, Jen. You might know more into that.
Yeah, it varies. I think sometimes you let the material, in this case, code, lead the way. And then sometimes you have an idea and then you want to make code make the thing. Neither option is wrong or right. I think it just depends on, one, which way do you like working, or also if you're working in a team, what's the goal of the output as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much both. I think that brings us to the end of our Q&A session. So that's great. I really want to try one of those data selfies myself after this.
And it's worth pointing out, Jen, your background is also made from code, isn't it? Did you generate that
this
yourself?
Is code. Yeah. This is in P5.
Very good.
And it's a version of an artist called Vera Molnar, who everyone should look up afterwards. French artist, does really great things, was a graphical designer, one of the first women pioneers of using code and graphic design.
Amazing. Thank you for that tip. That's brilliant. And then here is just a slide showing you how to get in touch with us. If you've got any questions about our programs or about visiting the V&A, do drop us a line at the email address on the screen and find out more about our programs on the website. Okay, so last thing to do is just say a massive thank you to Jen and Craig and also Melanie from earlier for taking part in today's session. And a huge thanks to all of you for joining us, and I hope to see you again soon.